And a little clarification is needed on what it means to be a black African. Many people think they know what black or negroid features look like: wide noses and full lips. Many black people do indeed have those features, but there are also many who don't. As the biological anthropologist Jean Harnox pointed out back in 1975, the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa vary tremendously in features. For example, sub-Saharan nose widths cover 92% of the world range, with only extremely narrow noses being absent from the sub-Saharan record. And some sub-Saharan populations also have thinner lips than the negroid stereotype. Thinner lips and narrower noses are particularly common in dry northeast African countries not far from Egypt, such as Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, and northern Sudan. Because of this, eyeballing ancient Egyptian sculptures to judge their negroidness is not the proper way of determining whether or not they were in fact black Africans. Then, how can we tell? One method used by biological anthropologists to determine relationships between populations is measuring and comparing the shapes of their skulls, since skull shape varies from region to region. Populations with more similar skulls are judged as being more closely related. Analyzed this way, ancient Egyptian skulls are particularly similar to those from northern Sudan, and are overall more closely related to black Northeast African populations than to Caucasian populations from Europe or the Middle East. Sub-Saharan characteristics are especially apparent in Upper or Southern Egypt, the cradle of Egyptian civilization. However, it must be noted that change in Egyptian skulls over the millennia has also been observed. There appears to be continuity in Egyptian skull shape between the beginning of Egyptian history, that is, the pre-dynastic period, and the Middle Kingdom, but significant change does occur during the New Kingdom, the period of Tutankhamun and Ramses II. This is perhaps caused by the immigration of Southwest Asians into Egypt during that period. Also, skulls from relatively late in Egyptian history are distinct enough from older Egyptian skulls to be considered not typically Egyptian. This is evidence that the Egyptian gene pool changed significantly over time as a result from migrations from other Mediterranean regions. Another line of evidence supporting a black African in ancient Egypt concerns the skeleton beyond the skull, specifically the proportions of the limbs. Tropical African peoples have proportionally longer limbs than do European or Asian peoples, because longer limbs dissipate heat more efficiently. More measurements of Egyptian skeletons have shown that their limb proportions were within the range of tropical Africans. In fact, they have sometimes been described as super negroid. This is especially significant because even though we stereotype Egypt as a warm place, it is not tropical. It cools off significantly during night as well as winter. The implication here is that the ancestors of the ancient Egyptians would have been relatively recent migrants from a nearby tropical region, which in this case would be sub-Saharan Africa. So, if the ancient Egyptians had facial features and limb proportions like those of tropical black Africans, you ask, did they have kinky hair like black people too? Yes, they did. But you would not know that from casually glancing at the hair found in Egyptian mummies, since the hair follicles appear to have been damaged by the mummification process. The evidence supporting kinky-haired Egyptians comes from measurements done with a device called a trichometer. After the trichometer is used to measure the cross-section of a hair, the minimum value for the hair's diameter is divided by the maximum and then multiplied by 100 to get an index. Kinky or curly hair produces an index between 55 and 70, while straighter hair produces an index above 70. Trichometer measurement of ancient Egyptian hair produces an average index of 60.02, similar to the average index for sub-Saharan hair. In other words, ancient Egyptians naturally had kinky to curly hair. However, most of the time they shaved off their natural hair and wore wigs, so ancient Egyptian artwork does not usually depict Egyptians wearing their natural hair. We finally come to the question of what skin tone the ancient Egyptians had. It's tempting to look at Egyptian tomb paintings for the answer, but we must remember that the colors used in these paintings were symbolic rather than realistic in nature. Individuals may be depicted as red, yellow, green, gold, or literally black in color depending on the context. Between the Old and Middle Kingdoms, it was common for men to be painted dark reddish brown and women to be painted yellow, but by the New Kingdom, both sexes were portrayed as brown-skinned. As far as I know, there has never been a study on Egyptian mummies that determines an exact skin tone. Analyzing the melanin content of mummy skin cells and comparing them to black African populations